The town square of Blackwater, Texas, erupted in chaos as Grace Willie's hands were yanked behind her back. "She poisoned my husband!" Martha Cordell's scream cut through the 1886 afternoon like a blade. "That old witch killed him with her remedies." Grace, 54 years old, with silver-streaked hair and weathered hands, stood perfectly still as the marshal approached. Her healing tinctures lay scattered in the dirt. Bottles she'd spent decades perfecting, now evidence against her. "Mrs. Willie," Marshal Crawford said grimly, "Thomas Cordell is dead. His wife says you gave him medicine yesterday." "I gave him willow bark tea for his fever," Grace said steadily. "The same remedy I've used for 20 years. "Well, he's dead now," Martha hissed, "and you're going to hang for it." The crowd pressed closer, hostile and hungry. Grace had lived in Blackwater for 3 years, always the outsider. Too old, too strange, too educated for a woman alone. Then a voice cut through the mob like a whip crack. "Step away from her!" Bill Havens pushed through the crowd, his 34-year-old frame lean and dangerous. His ranch clothes were dusty, his face hard with authority. "This doesn't concern you, Havens," the marshal warned. "It does now." Bill's gray eyes locked on Grace. "Because I know what killed Thomas Cordell. If you believe the truth matters more than the mob, if you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, stay with this story. Tell us where you're watching from. Your voice keeps the truth alive." But what did Bill know? And why was he protecting a woman he'd never met? Bill stepped between Grace and the marshal, his voice carrying across the square. "Thomas Cordell died of pneumonia, not poison. I was there 2 days ago when Doc Patterson examined him. The doc said his lungs were drowning." Martha Cordell's face twisted with fury. "You're lying to protect her." "Why would I?" Bill shot back. "I don't even know this woman, but I know Doc Patterson, and I know he told Thomas to stay in bed and keep warm. Did your husband listen, Mrs. Cordell?" Silence fell. Everyone knew Thomas Cordell had been seen at the saloon the night before he died, drinking and boasting despite his illness. The marshal hesitated. "Bill's got a point. We should wait for Doc Patterson's official report." "She's still a suspect," Martha insisted. "Lock her up." "I'll vouch for her," Bill said firmly. "She can stay at my ranch until this is sorted out. That way she's not in jail, but she's not running either." Grace finally spoke, her voice quiet but strong. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Bill met her eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, of 2 people who'd both been alone too long. "Because somebody should." The marshal reluctantly agreed. As Bill led Grace toward his wagon, she whispered, "You just made an enemy of Martha Cordell." "I've had worse enemies," Bill replied. "And I've made worse decisions." As they rode out of town, Grace studied the man beside her. "What's the real reason you defended me?" Bill's jaw tightened. "Because I watched them destroy my mother the same way when I was 12. False accusations, mob justice. I won't watch it happen again." But what else was Bill not telling her? Bill's ranch house was modest but well kept, a working man's home with care in its details. "Guest rooms through there," he said, nodding toward a door. "Door locks from the inside. You'll have privacy." Grace set down her small bag, all she'd managed to grab before the arrest. "Mr. Havens, I need you to understand something. I didn't kill Thomas Cordell, but Martha won't stop until I'm blamed for it. Helping me could ruin you." "I'm already half ruined," Bill said with a bitter smile. "Ranch is barely making it. Town thinks I'm a fool for not remarrying after my wife died. One more controversy won't hurt. Your wife died in childbirth 4 years ago. The baby, too. His voice was flat, controlled. So you see, Mrs. Willie, I know something about being blamed for things you can't control. The town whispered that I worked her too hard, that I didn't get the doctor fast enough. Maybe they were right. Grace's expression softened. Or maybe sometimes terrible things just happen, and it's nobody's fault. Bill looked at her sharply, as if hearing something he'd needed to hear for years. That evening, Grace insisted on cooking. Bill watched in surprise as she moved through his kitchen with quiet efficiency, creating a meal from his meager supplies that tasted better than anything he'd made in months. "You're good at this," he said. "I ran a boarding house in San Antonio for 15 years, Grace replied, "before my husband died and his brother took it from me. Said a woman couldn't manage property alone." Bill's fist clenched around his fork. "Seems like we've both been robbed." Outside, a rider approached in the darkness. Who was coming now? Doc Patterson dismounted slowly, his elderly face grave in the lamplight. "Bill, Mrs. Willie," he nodded to them both. "I came as soon as I finished the examination." "And?" Bill asked. Thomas Cordell died of pneumonia, complicated by acute alcohol poisoning. His lungs were full of fluid, and his liver was failing. Doc Patterson looked at Grace. "Your willow bark tea had nothing to do with it. In fact, it probably gave him a few more comfortable hours." Grace's shoulders sagged with relief. "I've filed my report with the marshal," Doc continued. "You're cleared, Mrs. Willie. But Martha Cordell is spreading a different story, and some folks would rather believe a grieving widow than an old doctor and a woman nobody knows." "Let them talk," Bill said firmly. Doc Patterson studied them both. "People are also talking about you two. A young widower and an older widow, alone on a ranch together. You know how this looks." "I know how the truth looks," Bill replied. "Mrs. Willie needed help. I provided it. Anyone who thinks otherwise can come say it to my face." After Doc Patterson left, Grace turned to Bill. "He's right. I should leave before this damages your reputation further." "Where would you go?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me." Bill's voice was low and intense. "What if I'm not sacrificing anything? What if—" He stopped himself. "Stay. At least until we figure out your next step." Grace looked at this man who'd defended her against a mob, who'd opened his home to a stranger, who looked at her like she mattered. "1 week," she said softly. "Then I'll decide." But that night, someone set fire to Bill's south pasture. Who wanted Grace gone badly enough to burn? The flames lit up the night sky like hell's own dawn. Bill and Grace ran toward the blaze, grabbing buckets and shovels. The fire had already consumed 20 acres of dried grass, racing toward the creek that was Bill's only water source for his cattle. "If it crosses the creek, I lose everything," Bill shouted over the roar. Grace didn't waste breath on words. She grabbed a shovel and began digging a fire break with strength that belied her 54 years. Bill stared for only a moment before joining her. They worked for hours, dirt and ash coating their skin, lungs burning from smoke. When the flames finally died at the creek's edge, both collapsed on the scorched earth, gasping. "Someone did this deliberately," Bill said. "I found oil-soaked rags at 3 different starting points." Grace's face was grim. "Martha Cordell wants me gone. She'll burn your whole ranch if that's what it takes." "Then she's made a mistake," Bill said quietly. "Because now I'm not just protecting you out of principle. Now I'm angry." They rode to town at dawn, covered in soot, smelling of smoke. At the marshal's office, Bill laid out the evidence. The oil-soaked rags, the multiple fire points, the timing right after Grace had been cleared. Marshal Crawford sighed. "I'll investigate. But Bill, maybe it's easier if Mrs. Willie just moves on." "Easier for who?" Bill's voice was steel. "For the person who's committing arson? No, Marshal. Do your job, or I'll take this to the county sheriff." As they left the marshal's office, Grace stopped Bill on the street. "Why are you doing this? You could lose everything." Bill looked at her, really looked at her. Not as an old woman, or a burden, or a charity case, but as a person. "Because in the last 3 days, you've worked harder than any ranch hand I've ever hired. You've cooked better meals than I've eaten in 4 years. And you've never once asked me to save you. You've been ready to save yourself." His voice roughened. "Maybe I'm not just protecting you. Maybe you're protecting me too. If you've ever stood your ground when the world wanted you to disappear, if you've ever found unexpected strength in the darkest moment, this story is yours. Share it. Tell us where you're watching from, because courage like this deserves to be witnessed." But Martha Cordell wasn't finished. What would she do next? 2 days later, Martha Cordell made her move. She arrived at Bill's ranch with the town mayor, a lawyer, and 3 prominent citizens. Her black mourning dress was pristine, her face a mask of righteous grief. "Mr. Havens," the mayor began uncomfortably, "Mrs. Cordell has filed a formal complaint. She believes Mrs. Willie is a dangerous influence and should be removed from Blackwater for the public good." "On what grounds?" Bill demanded. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Willie is an unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. It's improper. It gives the town a bad reputation." Grace stepped forward, her spine straight. "I'm a widow who was falsely accused and defended by a good man. If that offends your sensibilities, gentlemen, perhaps you should examine your own moral compass." Martha's eyes glittered with malice. "A woman of your age should know better than to throw herself at a younger man. It's unseemly. Desperate." The words hit like slaps. Grace's face flushed, but before she could respond, Bill spoke. "Then I'll make it proper." His voice rang out clear and strong. "Grace Willie, will you marry me?" The world stopped. Grace stared at him, shock written across her face. "Bill, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he interrupted. "I want to. These past few days, you've brought life back to this place, back to me. I'm 34 years old, and I'm asking a woman I admire and respect to be my wife. What's unseemly about that?" Martha Cordell's face turned purple. "This is ridiculous. She's old enough to be my equal," Bill finished. "My partner. My choice." He turned back to Grace, his eyes honest and clear. "I'm not asking out of obligation. I'm asking because I see who you are, and I want to build something with you." Grace's eyes filled with tears. Around them, the town dignitaries shifted uncomfortably, their moral crusade crumbling. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Bill Havens. I'll marry you." But was this real love, or just strategy, and could it survive what came next? They married 3 days later in Bill's ranch house, with Doc Patterson and 2 ranch hands as witnesses. Grace wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself. Bill wore his Sunday clothes, cleaned and pressed. There was no fancy ceremony, no crowd, just 2 people making promises they intended to keep. "I do," Bill said, sliding a simple gold band onto her finger. "I do," Grace replied, her voice steady. When Bill kissed her, it was gentle and real, a beginning, not a performance. That night they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The marriage had been announced in town, causing the expected scandal. Women whispered. Men laughed. Martha Cordell had reportedly screamed that it was a mockery. "Do you regret it?" Grace asked quietly. Bill took her hand. "Do you?" "I asked first." He smiled. "No. I don't regret it. These past few days have been the first time in 4 years I haven't felt alone. That's worth more than the town's approval." Grace squeezed his hand. "I haven't felt seen, truly seen, since my husband died. Maybe longer. Everyone looked at me and saw old widow or burden. You look at me and see me." "Because you're worth seeing," Bill said simply. They sat in comfortable silence, two lonely people finding unexpected companionship. But that night, Grace heard Bill crying in his room, deep, wrenching sobs he'd probably held back for years. She stood outside his door, hand raised to knock, torn between respecting his privacy and offering comfort. Finally, she knocked softly. "Bill?" The crying stopped. After a long moment, the door opened. Bill's face was wet with tears, his eyes raw. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I didn't mean for you to hear." Grace stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, he stood rigid. Then he collapsed into her embrace, holding onto her like she was the only solid thing in his world. What grief was Bill still carrying? And what would it mean for them? Bill told her everything that night. They sat by the fire while he spoke about Emily, his first wife, how they'd married young and happy, how the pregnancy had been difficult from the start, how he'd ridden through a storm to get the doctor, but it was too late. "She was in labor for 18 hours, he said, his voice breaking. "The baby was breech. Doc Patterson tried everything, but—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I lost them both. And the town whispered that if I'd been more successful, I could have afforded a better doctor. If I'd gotten there sooner. If I'd taken better care of her." "Bill," Grace said softly, "it wasn't your fault. Wasn't it?" His eyes were anguished. "I was supposed to protect her." Grace took his face in her weathered hands. "Listen to me. I've birthed animals and helped deliver babies for 30 years. Some births go wrong no matter what you do. Some lives are meant to be brief, and that's a cruelty we can't prevent. You loved her. You tried. That's all anyone can do." Bill's tears flowed freely now. "I haven't said her name out loud in 2 years. Everyone wants me to forget and move on, but forgetting feels like betrayal." "Then don't forget," Grace said. "Love her memory. Honor what you had. And know that loving again doesn't diminish what you lost. It proves you're still alive." Bill pulled Grace close, and this time when he held her, it wasn't desperation. It was gratitude, trust, maybe even the beginning of something deeper. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For being old enough to understand grief. Young people think healing means forgetting. You know it means carrying it with grace." Grace smiled sadly. "One advantage of being 54. I've had time to learn hard lessons." They fell asleep in front of the fire, Bill's head on Grace's shoulder, two wounded people finding healing in honesty. But morning brought new trouble. What now? The rider came at dawn with news that made Grace's blood run cold. "Mrs. Havens," the young man panted, "there's sickness in town. 3 families down with fever. They're asking for you. Said you're the only one who knows healing remedies." Grace looked at Bill. "It could be a trap. Martha Cordell could be using this to get me back to town. Or people could be genuinely sick, Bill countered. And you might be able to help. Grace stood, decision made. I'm going. It's what I do. Then I'm going with you. They rode into Blackwater together. The town square was nearly empty. People were hiding indoors, afraid of contagion. At the boarding house, they found 6 people burning with fever, including 2 children. Grace assessed them quickly. It's influenza. We need to bring the fevers down, keep them hydrated, and pray their lungs don't fill with fluid. For 3 days and nights, Grace and Bill worked alongside Doc Patterson. Grace mixed her remedies: willow bark for fever, elderberry syrup for immune support, steam treatments for congested lungs. Bill hauled water, changed bedding, and held frightened children while Grace worked. The town watched in shocked silence as the old widow they'd mocked proved herself indispensable. As the young rancher they'd pitied showed more compassion than any of them. On the 3rd night, Martha Cordell appeared in the doorway. Her face was ashen, her pride shattered. My sister's children are sick, she said quietly. Will you help them? Grace looked at the woman who'd tried to have her hanged, who'd burned Bill's pasture, who'd made her life hell. Then she picked up her medicine bag. Show me where they are. Bill watched her go, his heart swelling with something he'd thought died with Emily. He was falling in love with Grace Havens, his wife, his partner, his equal. But would everyone survive the epidemic? And what would Martha do now? All 6 original patients survived. Martha's niece and nephew recovered. Within a week, the epidemic had passed. The town's attitude toward Grace shifted like wind changing direction. Women who'd whispered about her now brought her preserves and thanks. Men who'd laughed tipped their hats respectfully. The mayor publicly apologized for doubting her character. Martha Cordell appeared at the ranch one morning, stiff and formal. Mrs. Havens, she said, I owe you an apology. My grief made me cruel. You saved my family, and I nearly destroyed you. She paused. Thomas died because he was a fool who wouldn't listen to doctors. Not because of you. I'm sorry. Grace accepted with quiet dignity. Grief makes us all do things we regret. I forgive you. After Martha left, Bill pulled Grace into his arms. You're extraordinary, you know that. Grace laughed. I'm a 54-year-old widow who mixes plant remedies. Nothing extraordinary about that. You're wrong. Bill's voice was fierce. You stood against a mob. You saved lives. You forgave the woman who tried to destroy you. And somewhere along the way, you saved me too. Grace looked up at him, this man 20 years her junior who'd seen her when no one else would. Bill Havens, are you saying you actually love me? This wasn't just strategy. It started as protection, he admitted. But Grace, these past weeks, working beside you, watching you face every challenge with courage, falling asleep with you by the fire, I've fallen completely in love with you. Not despite your age. Because of who you are. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. I never thought I'd have this again. Love, partnership, a home where I belong. You belong here, Bill said. With me. For as long as we both shall live. They kissed then, deep and real and full of promise. 6 months later, the ranch was thriving. Grace's healing practice brought steady income. Bill's cattle were healthy and multiplying. They'd hired 2 ranch hands and were planning to expand. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their nightly ritual. You know, Grace said, people still talk about us. Let them. Bill replied contentedly. They say I'm too old for you. Bill turned to her, his gray eyes full of love. Then they're not looking at what I see. I see my wife, my partner, the woman who brought my ranch and my heart back to life. He kissed her hand. You're not too old, Grace Havens. You're perfect for me. Grace smiled. 54 years old and more alive than she'd been in decades. And you're perfect for me. If you've ever been told you're too old, too different, too much or not enough, this story is your proof that love and purpose have no expiration date. Don't let this truth disappear. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Because your story matters just as much as Grace's.